50, on the morning of February 13th, 1984, 39-year-old Oliver Munson left his home on Orpington Road, located in Catonsville, Maryland, to head to work. Oliver was an industrial arts school teacher at Ellicott City Middle School in Howard County and was always reliable and punctual. But despite leaving home, he never turned up to the school, causing both his students and colleagues to become concerned, especially since he never called in sick. He has never been seen or heard from again, and was reported missing the following day. His brother James went to his house to check on him, but found it empty. He returned the day after and discovered that somebody had broken in and stolen Oliver's video equipment. It is unknown if the burglary is related to his disappearance. On February 16th, 2 days after he vanished, Oliver's 1980 Ford Pinto was found 2 blocks from his home. Parked on Braeside Road, the vehicle's right front tire was flat, and inside, investigators found his hat, notebook, and lunch bag. But there was no sign of the car's owner, and no indication as to where he might be. The vehicle's radio had been stolen. Oliver was described as a reclusive man. One of 6 siblings, he had graduated from the University of Maryland at East Shore before becoming a teacher. He was well liked by both his students and colleagues, and often took his pupils bowling and played softball with them after school. In his free time, he liked to work on old cars, and on most weekends he left town to visit family. He appeared to be an ordinary man with no known enemies, and his abrupt disappearance was most unusual. A fortnight passed before further progress was made in the case. On February 27th, the police were alerted by a man named Hilton Solomon that he had found some strange items in his car, which had reportedly been stolen back on February 13th, the day of the disappearance. According to Solomon, the car, which was a 1973 Datsun 240Z, had been found parked at the edge of Leakin Park in West Baltimore, and inside it, he had recovered 2 video store receipts with Oliver's name on them. When the police arrived to examine the vehicle, they discovered traces of human blood and a spent, small-caliber shell casing. While authorities were able to determine that the blood was type O positive, they were never able to concretely link it to Oliver. His blood type was unknown, and forensics were not advanced enough at that point to compare DNA. Although it was sent off for testing in later years, by that time it had deteriorated too far to be tested. With this new evidence, investigators began theorizing that Oliver had been murdered for giving evidence against an automobile theft ring. In January of 1983, roughly a year before his disappearance, the school teacher had purchased a used classic Datsun 240Z, unaware that it had been stolen 3 months before. He bought the vehicle from a man named Dennis Watson, a garage owner who used his business to cover his chop shop, where he resold stolen cars or dismantled them for parts. Just 2 months after Oliver had purchased the Datsun, the police, who had been quietly watching and investigating Wilson for some time, raided the garage. Authorities found Oliver's name, with some of the paperwork taken from the scene, and asked him to testify against Wilson during his trial. Oliver agreed. He was scheduled to testify 3 days after he went missing. Notably, Dennis Watson is suspected of being involved in the death of another man who was set to testify against him. A decade earlier, a 29-year-old named Clinton Glenn was knocked unconscious before being burned alive in a car registered to Watson. Clinton was due in court the following day. Although there was a witness in this case, the witness died of a suspicious overdose before they were due to testify. As a result, the first-degree murder charge against Watson was dropped. Still, Oliver's lack of appearance in court did not stop Watson from going to jail for his part in the automobile theft. He pled guilty to the charges laid against him and was given 10 years behind bars, although he was paroled in 1989 after serving less than half his sentence. He was questioned about Oliver's disappearance, but maintained his innocence. After his release from prison, he disappeared, and his whereabouts are currently unknown. There are a few theories in Oliver's case. The main one was proposed by a detective who worked on the original investigation. He suggested that Oliver's tire was tampered with, which caused him to need to pull over. In this theory, Oliver was being tailed by several individuals who were driving Hilton Solomon's car and who offered him assistance. When he accepted, the 39-year-old sat in their passenger seat and was shot from behind by somebody sitting in the back. His body was then dumped or buried at Leakin Park. Another theory in the case was proposed by a friend of Oliver's, who stated that he often joked about leaving to start a new life. At the time of his disappearance, he was dealing with a breakup, his school was facing closure, and his house had suffered severe damage after several water pipes had burst. However, the majority of Oliver's friends and families do not believe that he left of his own volition, and authorities think it's most likely that he met with foul play given the circumstances. In 1985, Oliver was declared legally dead. A judge ruled that he was the victim of a presumptive homicide. The case remains unsolved, and no other persons of interest or suspects have been made public. Oliver Munson was 39 when he went missing from Catonsville, Maryland. He left his home on Orpington Road on the morning of February 13, 1984, and was never seen or heard from again. Oliver is described as a black male with black hair and brown eyes. He is around 5'6" to 5'10" in height, and weighed between 150 and 160 pounds. His DNA is available for comparison. If he is still alive, he will be 77 years old. If you have any information about Oliver's disappearance, you can call the Baltimore County Police Department at 4 when his life came to an abrupt end in the winter of 2007. For years, Jonathan had been a regular churchgoer who aspired to become a preacher, but all that changed when he became involved with a local Sheffield gang known as S3, who got their name from their postcode. The gang had been feuding with a rival group named S4 for several years when Jonathan became embroiled in a life of crime. He stopped dreaming of becoming a preacher and began to skip church visits. Instead, he planned to become a rapper. On the streets, he was known as Venomous and Vendog, and would often carry both a gun and a blade. At the time of his death, he was serving a supervision order for robbery. On Wednesday, October 17, 2007, 16-year-old Jonathan was walking through a park near a child's playground in the Burngreave area of Sheffield when he was shot dead. A bullet was fired from a distance of around 60 feet by a weapon with a red laser device attached to it. This helped the perpetrator accurately aim. The single shot struck the teenager in the head. His body was discovered behind a baseball court shortly afterwards. As police began to investigate, they discovered that Jonathan had been affiliated with the S3 gang. The same weapon used to kill the teenager had been used 2 months before to fire shots at the home of another S3 gang member. Both the S3 and S4 gangs had been responsible for a series of gun attacks and stabbings in the city, particularly in the Burnsgreave and Pittsmore areas, with the police compiling a dossier of 38 incidents by the time Jonathan's case went to trial. According to the residents of Burngreave, hours before the murder occurred, one group chased another into a nearby park, firing shots as part of an ongoing gun battle. Jonathan had been speaking with his girlfriend, Siobhan, at the time. She heard a gunshot, followed by a friend of Jonathan's shouting, "Come on, Venomous, run, run!" He replied, "I'm not running for no one. No one is trying to bust shots at us." The friend responded with, "Don't stop, keep running." Siobhan then heard a big crash before the line went dead. A witness at the time reportedly saw 5 hooded males running after Jonathan. They had guns in their waistbands. The detectives who worked on Jonathan's case at the time firmly believe that numerous individuals were involved with the crime and that his murder was part of a pre-planned plot, stating that Jonathan was targeted and ruthlessly killed in an organized and planned attack. They uncovered that the teenager had told a friend of his that in the days before his death, he had either stabbed or slashed somebody in a nightclub called The Vibe, located in Sheffield city centre. Furthermore, investigators believed that Jonathan had been targeted in retaliation for a shooting at a house belonging to the relatives of an S4 member the night before his death. Just a few hours before he was shot in the head, an attempt was made on the 16-year-old's life while he visited a friend's flat on Melrose Road in Pittsmore. The attempt was a failure, leading to this second effort. In the year following Jonathan's demise, 19-year-old Negus Nelson was arrested and put on trial twice. A member of the S4 gang, Nelson's aunt and uncles were the relatives whose house had been targeted the day before Jonathan was killed. During Nelson's first trial, the jurors could not agree on a verdict. Nelson denied being the shooter, but had been found with firearm residue on his clothing when he was arrested for the first time just 2 days after the murder. He claimed that he'd come into contact with a lot of people, and the residue could have come from anywhere. Furthermore, Nelson is of Afro-Caribbean origin, but has light skin, as he has albinism. Jonathan told his girlfriend that the man who had fired on him earlier on the day he was killed was, quote, albino-looking, white man, proper white, but black. Nelson was tried again in late 2008, where he was found not guilty and cleared of involvement. In 2018, now aged 29, Nelson was jailed for 16 months along with 3 other men after fights broke out in a Sheffield nightclub and several men were stabbed. In the years since Jonathan's death, no one else has been arrested or tried for the murder. Following the crime, Jonathan's mother left Sheffield. She had come to the UK when her son was just 6 years old to escape a civil war in the Democratic Republic of Congo. At the time, Sheffield had been considered one of the United Kingdom's safest cities, and the ruthless murder of 16-year-old Jonathan sent shockwaves through the community. The local police force promised to relentlessly pursue the perpetrator, but so far, Jonathan's case remains unsolved. If you have any information about Jonathan's murder, you can contact Crime Stoppers anonymously on 0800